In this model, we will talk about, as you can see in the slides, we talk about agricultural risk management. Uh, Agricultural risk management is, another way, a structured approach to identifying, assessing, and generally addressing uncertainty in farmers. So in a way to study and investigate on the weather, market price fluctuation, policy changes. So it involves, in broad uh, general terms, involve a combination of strategy, including farm practice, such as crop diversification, and more recently climate smart agriculture, for example. And moreover, we have also strategy that foresee the use of market-based tools such as future contract, crop insurance, and of course, we involved in these very broad fields, very actual fields. Also, the government and institutional supports like safety nets and sharing initiative. So, of course, without neglecting the peculiarity of the production condition in agriculture, is undeniable that agriculture is in developed countries has reached such levels of complexity that both the ranking in terms of relevance of the several causes of income variability and the impact of a given variation in farm revenue on the viability of the farmer enterprises have radically changed than in the past. So the organization of agricultural production and its integration in the agri-food chain, the increased use by farmers of service such as credit, professional technical assistance, finance and insurance, the regulatory system within which farmers operate, and the diversification of income generating activity within rural households are all factors that make the risk faced by today's farmers in developed economy something deeply different and more articulated than what it used to be only a few decades ago. So the first step would be, in this part one of this model, understanding agricultural risk. So we have in the scientific literature that risks are being classified in various ways. One traditional classification distinguishes production risk in sensu stricto, that is the possibility of lower than expected output quantity and or quality production, from price or market risk, either in terms of input pricing rising or output price falling after production commitment, personal risk, for example, risk of personal illness, accident or death, and institutional risk, for example, the possibility of the relevant norms or regulation would change unexpectedly. In the first part of this model, we spend time to understand the peculiarity of risk management in agriculture in a way to introduce later several aspects concerning the institutional role in supporting several tools that could be used by farmers, how different tools work to support farmers to manage and cope with risk, and how risk could be assessed. So in this scenario, more time will be devoted to the strategy that forces the transfer of risk, for example, the crop insurance. So if we would be very focused at the very, we would resume this concept, these words, we could summarize that we will follow the risk identification, so that recognizing the diverse different sources of risk, the risk assessment, so that evaluating the likelihood, so the frequency and the potential impact in terms of severity of adverse outcome, and the question related to the risk mitigation and management that will be focused to employing various tools and strategy to manage risk. And this part would involve also the role of public and the institutional support to risk management in agriculture. So, in a way to start, we know that the biological nature of agricultural production processes and their strong dependency on the natural and climatic condition would induce, among other things, an higher degree of uncertainty that surround the economic performance of farmers, in comparison to what happened in other sectors of the economy. So agriculture is arguably the sector of production where factors outside the manager's control are more heavily responsible of the final results of the enterprise. Something that has contributed to the development and acceptance of formal public intervention aimed at reducing income variability that have no parallel in other sectors of the economic system. During the past 20 years, more or less, new macroeconomic forces have changed the shape of many agricultural risks, not only for food crops, but also for agricultural supply chains, more broadly speaking. So in light of long-term trends such as globalization and climate change, managing agricultural risk is even more crucial to shortening the shock-recovery shock cycle. Climate change is increasing vulnerability and contributing in a way to protracted crisis, whereas globalization is connecting the world as never before through trade, financial market, and politics. So the global economy has become a more complicated space where for example, shift in the US with production can affect Niger food security, and economic growth in China can increase global demand for high protein agricultural products. Some analysts observe that changing fundamental of demand and supply of agricultural commodity have related to the creation of thin commodity markets that are intrinsically more vulnerable to adverse events. So the foregoing trends are likely to aggravate the current levels of volatility and lead to further uncertainty. Price fluctuation, as shown in the figure, are a common feature of well-functioning agricultural product market. But when this become large and unexpected or volatile, they can negatively impact the food security of consumers, farmers, and entire country. You can see since 2007, where markets have seen a series of dramatic fluctuation in the months in the commodities prices. Food prices reached their highest level for 30 years during the summer of 2008, collapsing following, before rapidly rising again in the months that followed. Similar patterns have been observed since June 2020, of course, almost in the same time where just before the conflict with Russia and Ukraine. So the question is, what are the reasons for this instability? A first likely could be bounded in eventuality that international markets for agricultural commodities are at the stage in which the new scarcities show in all its clarity. In past years, the adjustment of supply to demand was guaranteed by technical progress, and the agricultural sector has experienced a period of great agricultural capacity almost on a global scale that we can call the Green Revolution, that has seen a remarkable increase in world agricultural production for several decades. Now, due to the need for more sustainable agriculture, less use of chemical inputs, and due to the concept that having reached a technological barrier such as to be able to achieve only marginal short-term increases. So the long era of abundant foods available at a low price is over, in my opinion, and has given way to an era of that we can call the era of the new scarcity. It would be clear now that, referring at the market instability, one of the main drivers is the growth in higher purchasing power among increasingly broad ranges of the population in the emerging countries, such as China, India, Brazil. There has been a transition from a period of abundance, albeit characterized by problem of unfair distribution of available resources in a global scale, to one of structural scarcity manifested in a progressive widening of the scissors between food available and demand against a trend. At first timid and then more market of price rises. So for many years the change was not perceived, or was at the very least underestimated. The long-term changing climate is a significant source of risk to agriculture and food system, of course, beyond the short-term weather risk addressed in this methodological guidance. Scientists predict that climate change will alter climate conditions with increased weather and climate variability expected for most locations. So climate projections suggest that impacts will include shifts in average growing conditions, increased rain and temperature variability, and greater uncertainty in predicting future climate, of course, and weather conditions. So more concretely, this impact will translate into an overall warming trend, an increasingly erratic distribution of precipitation, rainfall, more frequent and more extreme weather events, and spatial shifts in pest and disease outbreak. So climate change does require adjusting both the new average climatic condition and preparing for more volatile weather with more frequent and intense extreme events in most locations. The remaining uncertainty over future long-term climate change will lead to more short-term weather volatility overall, combined these effects were from the new normal to which all stakeholders need to adapt. So although climate change is expected to produce both winners and losers overall, on global scale, losses will far outweigh the gains. And the poor will be disproportionately affected because of their dependence on agriculture and a lower capacity to adapt on this new condition. So yet stakeholders must develop the capacity to identify thresholds, triggering potential new hazard, and anticipate in a way which novel extreme events may arise in order to help prepare farmers as well as national and regional system in dealing with the risk linked with the new normality in terms of weather and climatic condition. So we know that climate change could be identified as a distribution of probability. If we consider the Gaussian normal distribution, we can consider that the higher probability to verify of weather and climatic condition will be concentrated around the mean of the distribution, and we can consider the normal weather observing the past, the weather meteorological trends that we are witnessed more frequently in the past. So we will consider the extreme weather manifestation as all weather condition that has been registered in the queue of the distribution. So in the queue of the distribution we have a very low probability to happen this new condition. So if you consider the climate change effect on the distribution of a probability of the weather and the climatic events, we could imagine a new distribution probability, a new normal Gaussian distribution that shifts up to the right in concomitance with the higher in temperature. So this shift to right of the normal Gaussian distribution have the effect to give more frequency, to have more probability to have extreme events that before the trend of climate change we had in the queue of the first distribution, normal distribution. So if we could summarize what were and catastrophic, of course, for farmers and for territory around the world, becoming normal. Becoming normal means that we could not pause on just on the observation of the past trend weather conditions. So we have a very, very different distribution of probability in the future of the extreme event at what we called in the past as normal weather. Of course, we have some estimate, some projection how climate change is going to affect natural and human system. We have, of course, impact on the energy sector. We have an impact on the tourism. We will have an impact on mortality. But in our terms, we have a huge impact on the river floods, we have a huge impact on agricultural yield, we have a huge impact on coastal floods. So, in a very summarizing words, we need to consider climate change for farmers as the new big challenge for the farmers' resilience in the future decades, in a way to warrant the food security in a global scale. So, just to introduce some basic definition: risk and uncertainty. Risk and uncertainty would appear as words that means the same concept, but in reality, especially in methodological terms, they are very different, because risk is an environment where we have perfect knowledge, where all possible outcomes are known for a given management decision, and we have for each outcome possible that we could draw by the observation of the past. So for all possible outcome we have a linked probability. So we know we could build a distribution probability observing what happened in the past. So risk is a very clear definition of all states of the world that are measurable. Uncertainty, contrary, refer to all situations where we don't have perfect knowledge. So all possible outcomes are unknown, the probability of the outcome are unknown. So both outcome and probability are unknown. What does it mean? It means that uncertainty cannot be measured. So, differently from risk, and this put on the table a very big challenges for public intervention, for farmers' strategy, for financial market, for insurance company, for the insurance market, because all the predicted scenario are moving, are shifting from risk era to uncertainty era. So we could summarize example for both terms that we are introduced before. In terms of knowledge, so we have for risk perfect knowledge, and for uncertainty we have imperfect knowledge. So if we could refer at the effect of climate change for farmers' activity, for agricultural commodity market, and so on, we could distinguish it from perfect knowledge in risk era until 2 decades ago, and uncertainty where we don't have perfect knowledge, when we have imperfect knowledge in the scenario and the forecast and so on. In terms of outcome, we have for risk absolutely no. In terms of distribution of probability of the events, especially if we talk about weather events. In terms of in the era of uncertainty, we don't know the outcome. And the same will be for the concept of the probability. So for risk, we know the probability distribution. For uncertainty, we don't know the distribution of probability. At the same stage, we have that risk will be measurable, meanwhile uncertainty be not measurable. And if we shift on the concept for the insurance company, risk is answerable, meanwhile in the uncertainty, risk is insurance is not insurable because we don't know the probability, we don't are able to measure and so on. So we could as we have the picture of some example for risk and uncertainty. If we talk about risk, we could refer to the incidence of pest and disease, shortfall in rainfall, fixed capital investment, monsoon failure or drought, no, would affect negative terms risk. If we talk about uncertainty, we could refer to the implication of the COVID pandemic, outbreak of avian flu, technology uncertainty, and so on. So we could recalling Oppenheimer definition, Oppenheimer law in 2015, risk are the potential for consequences where something of value is at stake and where the outcome is uncertain. Recognize the diversity of value. So risk could be identified to be equal to the probability of the event or the trends multiplied the consequence of this probability of the events. So risk result from the interaction of vulnerability and the exposure and hazard, as you can see summarized in the feature. So, calling and spend more time on the sources of the risk, specifically in the primary sector. We could say that we have, as a first distinguish between farmers and not farmers. In the common risk, so we have damage for building on equipment, for the damage for property, and personal risk that are common for farmers and non-farmers. But farmers face unique risk. For example, damages from adverse weather condition or unexpected disease, no? And farmers could lost his production if extreme weather occur in this part. In the same sense, farmers could face unexpected decline in price, in market price, no? So, as we point out before, market volatility has become one of the big challenges for farmers in the recent years. And farmers also face new risk, so BSA, foot and mouth disease, avian flu, and so on, no? Because globalization and the new scenario in the recent years have very complicated the organization and the agriculture production for farmers' activity. So, To provide useful insight in a policy-oriented discussion on the relevance of risk and on the most appropriate means to deal with it, we suggest a three-dimensional classification that distinguish risk-generating events according to degree or the levels of the frequency, the risk, so distinguish from rare or frequent risk, in terms of severity, so see the extent of damages caused from negligible to significant, and that in agricultural sector is a very, very important question, the correlation between the affected farmers. So risk can be classified along a line that goes from idiosyncratic risk to systemic risk. That is the events which simultaneously affect many farmers, many areas. So depending on the combination of these three dimension characteristics that we just introducing, damaging events might be located in a three-dimensional space. No? It's like this box, how you can see in the title of the slides, where each vertex of the box corresponds to a prototypal risk. No real-world event would be perfectly correspond to one of the extreme forms of risk events. Nevertheless, the classification highlights the several combinations of characteristics which are most relevant to the definition of an ideal management tool. So if we accept an event of type H, events which are frequent and whose negative consequences are significant and systemic, and for which the only beneficial strategy would be to try to avoid them, for example, by not locating the production activity in the risk-prone environment. Most of the risk linked to the events depicted in the risk box could be efficiently managed. From a farmer's point of view, therefore, the best strategy usually calls for comparing the cost to transfer the risk to the cost of retaining it. So the possibility to effectively transfer risk depends crucially on the sharing of information between the interested party. So the problem of incomplete information are usually responsible for the high level of the premium to pay required to transfer the risk. So we start to introduce the question of the crop insurance market in agriculture and why public intervention is fundamental to allow the meet demand and supply in these specific markets. So to this respect, a fourth dimension could be added to distinguish risk according to their predictability, intended here as the ability to associate the reliable probability distribution with the event. So predictability is a crucial condition for assessing the cost of a given risk management strategy and is a basic requirement for both insurability, that is, the possibility of establishing correct premium for feasible insurance contract, and the potential for hedging through the use of financial derivative, for example. So the most common risk coping strategy is based on the use of personal financial reserves, such as saving, in a way to smooth consumption when facing varying income. So the resulting self-insurance is going to be the most efficient risk management option when transaction costs that we introduced before exist, that make other form of risk transfer, such as crop insurance, less attractive. So its cost is given by the opportunity cost of the financial reserve that need to be immobilized. So in this scenario, will be very relevant also the role that exists in the primary section in the connection from farmers to the bank, no? The credit channel that is very, very relevant in a way to pursue these kind of strategies. So the other extreme, when the potential damage is very high, the best action probably is to be the risk avoidance. So that this aim in this context, action include decisions such as relocating production activities in areas less prone and so on. And an important question would be to invest in physical protection. Think about irrigation plant against road or protecting nets against hail, no? And other, of course, other important risk management strategy, if we look at the ex-ante risk management in agriculture, will be the shared risk, so transfer risk to other actors, so insurance company or participate to mutual fund or transfer the market risk to financial markets. These are usually rather costly actions that are taken only when the combination of frequency and severity of the event that we have looked in the risk box is such that transferring the risk or coping with it becomes too expensive. In many cases, the most effective risk reduction option remained the diversification of the portfolio, crop portfolio, and something that has been long recognized by farmers all over the world who balance their exposure to risk by engaging in cultivation of different crops or by mixing crop and livestock activities or by employing part of their family resource in an off-farm activity. The key aspect in this context of successful diversification in terms of risk reducing potential is to find activity whose returns are clearly uncorrelated to farmers' activity. So in this sense, the opportunity and the incentive for income diversification are copious, especially in developed countries. Diversification, however, will come at the cost of foregoing possible gain due to specialization in the single activity, which has the highest expected return. These are very key elements, especially in a developed country. No, the specialization is one of the most leverage used by farmers to increase their revenue. but the vast majority of economic relevant risk can be transferred. So the typical risk transferring action is, of course, insurance, which can take several forms in agriculture. There exists extensive literature on the role of insurance in agriculture, which has been used to different extents since a very long time. So the general conclusion, talking about crop insurance in primary sector, is that the use of insurance in agriculture is a viable instrument only for some risk, which bear the characteristic of being idiosyncratic, rare, and whose damages are relevant. So if we refer the risk book before introducing, we are talking about the area towards the events in our risk books. When the damages are not so relevant, it is usually cheaper for the farmers to retain the risk, resorting to self-insurance through the use of savings, for example. One aspect that is important to underline this context is that when the events and the damages are very systemic, crop insurance cannot be a perfect way to transfer risk because insurance company cannot diversify risk among insured portfolio. So the most common problems with traditional insurance related to the presence of asymmetric information and to the degree of correlation among potential insured risks. So the farmers of insured portfolio that we just recalled before for the systemic risk, which involve a very, very high share of farmers area insured at the same moment are exposed to at the same events. So asymmetric information leads to no problem of adverse selection and moral hazard. In very, very short and intuitive terms, adverse selection arises when it is difficult for the insurance to ascertain, identify the actual degree of risk exposure of the potential insured. In our case, the farmers. And the premiums cannot be customized to at individual levels. The moral hazard, contrary, refers to the situation where the presence of the insurance may induce hidden action on the part of the insured, who could have the incentive to lower its operating cost at the risk of increasing either the probability or the extent of the damages once the insurance contract is in place. So that the insured, the farmers that have subscribed a crop insurance, will benefit from the reduction in cost while not bearing the consequences of the increased risk, which has been transferred to the insurer. So as long as perfect monitoring of the insurance action is impossible or costly, moral hazard might compromise the viability of the insurance schemes. So why risk arises in agriculture? If we could summarize, risk are always only present in the primary sector, due to the following factors: dependence on nature, production risk, risks that are linked to human elements, personal risk, markets, so the price risk, market risk, government rule and regulation that could introduce the institutional risk, financial matter, so the financial risk, and business risk that aggregate all the risk combined except financial. Hazard, type of risk being considered, so the quantification of the hazard is assessed considering frequency, severity, spatial events. Vulnerability means the estimation of what the impact of the realized risk, and of course would be very relevant to the exposure, so the identification of the location of crops, livestock, farm holding that might be directly impacted by the hazard. Our risk perspective needs to, the first, engage all stakeholders who are affected by agricultural risk and would take action to manage them. Number two, consider the full range of risk. Three, analyze different strategies to manage risk. And fourth, understand the different steps in the risk management process, as summarized before. So, this analysis typically involve to prioritize the major risks that affect various stakeholders. So the risk prioritization subsequently inform identification of specific risk management intervention and strategy to be implemented in the short to the medium term. So risk management could be identified as a process that needs to be reevaluated throughout the years as underlying condition change over time. So conducting periodic risk assessment can provide valuable snapshots that assist in the design of new tools and in refining of existing intervention.